"Elias, my man! Looking sharp!" boomed Damian Ross, my business partner, his grip on my shoulder a little too tight, his smile a little too wide. Damian, with his slicked-back hair and his predatory grin, was the epitome of the ambitious, cutthroat businessman. He was my partner, my equal, or so the paperwork said. "Damian," I replied, clapping him on the back, my own smile genuine, foolishly so. "Good to see you. Enjoying the evening?" "Never better," he said, his eyes scanning the room, searching for his next conquest, his next opportunity. "This is quite a turnout. You've really outdone yourself, Elias." His words were complimentary, but there was a subtle edge to his voice, a hint of resentment that I, in my blissful ignorance, chose to ignore. Then there was Sienna, my wife. She glided towards me, a vision in a scarlet gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate updo, revealing the diamond necklace I had given her for our anniversary. She was beautiful, undeniably so, and the envy of every man in the room. "Darling," she purred, pressing a kiss to my cheek, her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and something subtly dangerous, filling my senses. "You look exhausted. Are you sure you're all right?" "Just a bit stressed, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile. "The sterling deal." "Don't worry about that now," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Tonight is about celebrating. About us." Her touch, once a source of comfort and warmth, now felt cold, calculated. But I dismissed the feeling, attributing it to my growing anxiety about the business. And finally, there was Lucas Gray, my best friend since college. Lucas, with his unassuming demeanor and his quiet intelligence, was the anchor in my storm-tossed life, the one person I trusted implicitly. "Elias," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, his smile genuine, or so I believed. "Another triumph. You make it look so easy." "Just lucky, I guess," I replied, shrugging modestly. "Good friends, good partners. That's the key." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "Couldn't have done it without you, Elias. You know that, right?" I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for these people, for their support, for their friendship. I'm a lucky man, I thought, raising my glass in a silent toast. A very lucky man. The evening progressed, a blur of champagne, forced smiles, and empty conversations. I played the role of the gracious host, the successful businessman, the devoted husband. But beneath the surface, a knot of unease was tightening in my stomach. Something felt off. It all came crashing down the next morning. A frantic call from my CFO, a flurry of emails, a news report flashing across the television screen. Vance Enterprises accused of massive financial fraud. CEO Elias Vance implicated. It was a setup, of course. A meticulously planned, ruthlessly executed betrayal. Damian, seizing the opportunity, presented evidence of my supposed wrongdoing, painting me as a corrupt, greedy criminal who had embezzled millions from the company. The board of directors, swayed by Damian's lies and the damning, fabricated evidence, voted to remove me as CEO, effective immediately. My assets were frozen, my accounts seized, my reputation destroyed. Sienna, my beautiful, loving wife, stood by Damian's side, her expression cold and indifferent. She refused to take my calls, to see me, to offer even a shred of support. "I can't be associated with a criminal, Elias," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion when I finally managed to reach her. "It's over. My lawyers will be in touch." It became clear when I saw her, days after, wearing a very expensive necklace I had never seen before. And on Damian's arm. Lucas, my best friend, my confidant, offered nothing but empty platitudes and a thinly veiled satisfaction. I always knew there was something off about you, Elias," he said, shaking his head sadly. "I just never thought you'd stoop this low." In a matter of hours, I had gone from being a billionaire CEO to a penniless pariah. My empire had crumbled, my friends had betrayed me, and my life was in ruins. Desperate, stripped of everything, I arranged a meeting, a secret one. I thought maybe I could reason, but it was a lie, a final trap. I was lured to an abandoned alley, a dark, desolate place that reeked of garbage and despair. The attackers were waiting for me, shadowy figures who emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden, their intentions clear. They beat me brutally, relentlessly, their fists and boots connecting with sickening thuds. I felt bones break, ribs crack, my vision blurring, my consciousness fading. "This is for taking what's mine." A voice, distorted, growled, and I barely identified the speaker as Damien before a final kick to my head plunged me into darkness. As I lay there, bleeding, broken, dying in the cold rain, the full weight of my betrayal crashed down on me. It wasn't just the loss of my company, my wealth, my reputation. It was the loss of trust, the shattering of the illusion that I had built my life upon. They planned this, I thought, my mind reeling, my body screaming in pain, all of them, all along. My last thoughts were a mixture of regret and a burning, all-consuming rage. Regret for my naivety, for my blindness, for my misplaced trust. Rage at the injustice, at the betrayal, at the sheer cruelty of it all. If I could do it all over again? The thought flickered, a desperate, dying ember. I'd make them pay. I'd make them all pay. And then the darkness swallowed me whole. The first sensation was warmth. A soft, comforting warmth that enveloped me, chasing away the cold, the pain, the darkness. Then came the scent, lavender, and old books, a familiar, comforting smell that tugged at the edges of my memory. I opened my eyes, slowly, cautiously, my vision blurry, my head pounding. I was lying in my bed, in my penthouse, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the opulent room. What? Confusion slammed into me, a disorienting wave. This wasn't right. This was before. Before the betrayal, before the ruin, before the alley. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind racing. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The sleek, modern furniture, the expensive artwork, the panoramic view of the city skyline. It was all there, untouched, unchanged. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaky, my bare feet padding softly on the plush carpet. I reached for the mirror above the dresser, my hand trembling. And then I saw him. Me. But not the broken, defeated man I had become. This was me, 10 years younger. The lines of stress and worry that had etched themselves onto my face were gone, replaced by a youthful smoothness, a confident, almost arrogant gleam in my eyes. My hair was thicker, darker, the gray at my temples not yet visible. I touched my face, my fingers tracing the unfamiliar contours, the absence of the weariness that had become my constant companion, my jaw. I didn't have that scar, the one I got. 10 years, I'm back. The words echoed in my mind, a silent scream of disbelief and dawning realization. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination, it was real. Somehow, impossibly, I had been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite my history, to undo the mistakes, to avoid the catastrophe that had been my life. I looked at my phone. It was an older model, a sleek but dated design that I haven't held in years. The screen came to life, and there it was. The date, 10 years ago. Today was the day of the gala, the start of everything. Panic surged through me, a cold wave of terror. Was I going insane? Was this some elaborate, cruel trick of my dying mind? I staggered back, my hands clutching at my head, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Good morning, Elias." The voice startled me. It was soft, gentle, familiar, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I looked around the room, searching for the source of the voice, but I was alone. "Are you feeling all right, sir? You look a bit pale." The voice again, clear, distinct, but silent. It was the voice of Mrs. Davison, my housekeeper, and she wasn't in the room. I slowly turned my head, my gaze fixed on the closed door that led to the hallway. I could hear her thoughts, as clear as if she were speaking aloud. She was worried about me, wondering if I was ill, debating whether or not to bring me coffee. I can hear her thinking. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was impossible, insane, and yet undeniably real. I staggered back to the bed, collapsing onto the mattress, my mind reeling. I had been given a second chance, a miraculous, unbelievable opportunity. But it came with a twist, a power, a gift that defied logic and reason. I could read minds. I spent the next few hours testing the limits of my newfound ability. I went downstairs, interacting with the household staff, the maid, the chef, the chauffeur. Each time I heard their thoughts, their unspoken words, their hidden feelings. The maid, Maria, was complaining internally about her low wages, her long hours, her resentful feelings towards the wealthy elite she served. "Another day, another $1, she thought, while smiling politely. Or, in my case, another day, another few cents. These people have no idea what it's like to struggle. The chef, Jean-Pierre, was secretly planning to open his own restaurant, dreaming of Michelin stars and culinary acclaim. One day, I heard him thinking, while preparing my breakfast omelet, one day I'll be the one giving orders. I'll be the one with the name on the door. The chauffeur, Thomas, was worried about his sick child, fretting over medical bills and missed work. How am I going to pay for this? He thought, as he opened the car door for me. I need a miracle. It was overwhelming at first, a cacophony of voices, a torrent of thoughts and emotions flooding my mind. But I quickly learned to focus, to filter out the noise, to zero in on the specific thoughts I wanted to hear. And as I listened, as I learned, a new plan began to form in my mind. A plan not just for survival, but for revenge. A plan not just for reclaiming my life, but for building a new one, a better one, a life where I was in control. The crystal ballroom glittered, just as it had 10 years before. The same opulent decorations, the same carefully orchestrated ambiance, the same sea of smiling faces hiding a multitude of sins. But this time I saw through the facade. I heard the whispers, the judgments, the hidden agendas. I was no longer an oblivious participant. I was a silent observer, a predator in the midst of unsuspecting prey. The charity gala, the event that had marked the beginning of my downfall, was now the stage for my resurgence. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in my own past, my senses on high alert. Every conversation, every glance, every touch was a source of information, a piece of the puzzle I was putting together. "Elias, darling, you look wonderful," Sienna gushed, approaching me with that practiced smile, that air of effortless grace that had once captivated me. "Don't you think so, Damien?" she added, loud enough for him to hear. I looked at her, really looked at her, hearing the cold calculation beneath her sugary words. He looks tired, she thought, her internal voice laced with disdain. And that suit is definitely last season. He needs to try harder if he wants to keep up appearances. "You look stunning, Sienna," I replied, my voice smooth and even, masking the contempt that churned within me. "Radiant, as always." I felt, more than saw, Damien approaching. He was trying to seem casual, but his mind was a whirlwind of envy, and I was surprised to discover fear. He suspects something, Damien thought, his internal voice a frantic whisper. He's different, colder. He's looking at me like he knows. Elias, good to see you. He offered his hand. Damien, I said, taking his hand. Our handshake lasted a few seconds too long, our eyes locked. I'm going to enjoy watching you fall, Damien, I thought, projecting the words into his mind with all the force I could muster. He flinched almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. I felt it. A flicker of fear, of uncertainty crossed his face. What the hell was that? He thought, his internal voice a panicked squeak. Did he just... I smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Just admiring the ballroom, Damien, I said aloud. It's quite a spectacle, isn't it? Then Lucas arrived. He was the hardest to read. His thoughts were a mess. He seems different, he thought. Did he find out? No, impossible. I was too careful. Elias, he started. Great party. I know, Lucas, I replied, my voice even. I spent the rest of the evening playing my part, the charming, oblivious host, while secretly gathering intel, planting seeds of discord, and manipulating my enemies like pieces on a chessboard. I complimented Sienna on her dress, knowing she had purchased it with my money, knowing she was planning to wear it again on her first date with Julian. You look beautiful, darling, I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. That color suits you. He suspects nothing, I heard her think, relief flooding her mind. He's still the same gullible fool. I engaged Damien in a conversation about the Sterling deal, subtly dropping hints about potential problems, knowing he would dismiss them, blinded by his own arrogance. The due diligence is impeccable, Elias, he said confidently. This deal is solid. It's going to make us both a fortune. He's so sure of himself, I heard him think. He has no idea what's coming. I sought out Lucas, offering him words of encouragement, feigning concern about his recent bad luck in the market. I'm worried about you, Lucas, I said, my voice filled with fake concern. You seem stressed. Is everything all right? It's Damien, I heard him think, his internal voice a torrent of paranoia and resentment. He's up to something, I know it. He's trying to cut me out. I'm here for you, Lucas, I said aloud, patting him on the back. Always? As the evening drew to a close, I stood on the balcony, overlooking the glittering cityscape, a glass of champagne in my hand. The same view I had admired 10 years before, on the night my life had changed forever. But this time, everything was different. This time I was in control. I had the power, the knowledge, the advantage. I was no longer a victim, a pawn in someone else's game. I was the master of my own destiny, the architect of my own revenge. I smiled, a cold, knowing smile that would have sent shivers down the spines of anyone who truly knew me. The game has begun, I whispered to the night, my voice barely audible above the city's hum. And this time, I'm playing with a loaded deck. And they had no idea how loaded it truly was. Elias moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose, a ghost in the machine of his former life. He was rarely seen at Vance Enterprises, preferring to work from his home office, a stark contrast to his previous, highly visible leadership style. Instead, he spent hours on the phone, making calls to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, contacts in finance, media, and even law enforcement. His first target was Damien's prized Sterling deal. Elias, armed with future knowledge of the deal's hidden flaws, began a campaign of subtle sabotage. He leaked a carefully crafted, anonymous report to a prominent financial analyst known for his skepticism, highlighting potential environmental risks and inflated profit projections. The analyst, intrigued, began his own investigation. Simultaneously, Elias contacted a former colleague at the EPA, a man who owed him a favor, and subtly suggested that the Sterling project might be worth a closer look. He didn't need to say much. The seed of doubt was planted. Next, Elias turned his attention to Sienna. He feigned a renewed obsession with work, spending long hours at his home office, canceling dates, and generally neglecting her. He accidentally left a magazine open to an article about discreet matchmaking services for the wealthy elite, a subtle suggestion that he was considering other options. He hired a handsome, charming personal trainer, ostensibly for himself, but made sure the trainer was frequently seen chatting and laughing with Sienna. He knew that a crucial part of Sienna's eventual downfall was an affair, and he also knew how to set things in motion. For Lucas, Elias employed a different tactic: psychological warfare. He became the concerned friend, confiding in Lucas about his growing suspicions of Damien's business practices. He shared carefully fabricated evidence of Damien's supposed mismanagement, knowing that Lucas, already prone to paranoia, would jump to the worst conclusions. "I don't know, Lucas," Elias said during one of their late-night phone calls, his voice laced with feigned worry. "I've seen some irregularities in the accounts. Things just don't add up. I'm starting to think Damien might be hiding something." He didn't accuse Damien outright. He simply planted the seeds of doubt, letting Lucas's own insecurities do the rest. He even suggested that Damien might be trying to cut Lucas out of future deals, a fear that resonated deeply with Lucas's existing anxieties. Within weeks, the carefully constructed world of Elias's betrayers began to crumble. The Sterling deal, once hailed as a masterpiece, was now mired in controversy, its stock price plummeting. The EPA launched a formal investigation, and the financial analyst published a scathing report questioning Damien's integrity. Sienna, increasingly neglected and bored, began a flirtation with the personal trainer, fueled by her growing dissatisfaction with Elias and her belief that he was losing his fortune. Lucas, consumed by paranoia, started to openly question Damien's leadership, alienating himself from their mutual colleagues and business partners. He made rash decisions, fueled by his suspicion and distrust, further damaging his own reputation. Elias stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled, a vast, glittering tapestry of ambition and power. He took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. There was a brief flicker of doubt, a question of whether he was becoming the very thing he despised. But the thought was quickly dismissed. They had forced his hand. This was necessary. This was justice. He turned back to his office, a room transformed. It was no longer the opulent, yet ultimately superficial space of his past life. It was a command center, a war room, a fortress. Multiple monitors displayed stock charts, news feeds, and encrypted communications. Secure phone lines connected him to a network of contacts around the world. He reviewed his progress. His financial maneuvers, guided by his future knowledge, were proving incredibly successful. He had shorted Sterling stock just before its collapse, making a substantial profit. He had invested heavily in a small tech startup, knowing it would be acquired by a major corporation within the year. He was building a new empire, one that was far more secure, far more powerful than the one he had lost. But wealth was only one part of his plan. He was also assembling a network of loyal followers, people he could trust, people who would be instrumental in his rise to power. He used his mind-reading ability to identify individuals with valuable skills, unwavering loyalty, and a willingness to operate in the shadows. He recruited a former intelligence officer, a master of disguise and information gathering. He hired a brilliant hacker, capable of penetrating even the most secure systems. He cultivated relationships with influential politicians, journalists, and law enforcement officials, subtly influencing their decisions and securing their support. He didn't seek out these people with overt offers of power or wealth. Instead, he observed, he listened, he learned their secrets, their desires, their weaknesses. And then he offered them exactly what they wanted, in exchange for their loyalty. Damian Ross paced his office like a caged tiger. The once immaculate space was now in disarray, papers strewn across the desk, empty takeout containers overflowing the trash can. His tailored suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The Sterling deal, his masterpiece, his ticket to the top, had imploded. The investigation by the EPA and the SEC had intensified, and his investors were demanding answers. He slammed his fist on the desk, a primal scream of frustration building in his chest. He couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong. He had been so careful, so meticulous. He had covered his tracks, or so he thought. Meanwhile, Sienna Vance found herself increasingly isolated. Her social calendar, once overflowing with invitations, was now empty. Her friends had vanished, their smiles replaced by whispers and cold stares. The tabloids, fueled by the anonymously leaked photos of her with the personal trainer, were having a field day, painting her as a gold-digging adulteress. She sat alone in her increasingly empty penthouse, scrolling through her phone, desperately seeking a friendly voice, a sympathetic ear. But her calls went unanswered, her texts ignored. Even her supposed lover, the trainer, had disappeared, leaving her with nothing but a mountain of debt and a shattered reputation. Lucas Gray, once the picture of calm confidence, was now a shadow of his former self. He barricaded himself in his apartment, surrounded by computer monitors displaying news feeds, financial charts, and conspiracy websites. He was convinced that Damian was behind his misfortunes, that his former partner was plotting to destroy him. He had alienated his colleagues, accused his friends of treachery, and made wild, unsubstantiated claims to anyone who would listen. His once promising career was in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his mind unraveling. He saw enemies everywhere, conspiracies lurking in every shadow. Elias orchestrated the confrontations with a stage manager's precision, ensuring each betrayer faced their reckoning in a setting that amplified their downfall. Damian Ross was summoned to the very alley where Elias had been left for dead. The stench of garbage and decay hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of Damian's cruelty. Damian arrived looking disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes haunted by desperation. Elias, Damian began, his voice hoarse. I need your help. They've taken everything. My company, my reputation, everything. Elias watched him, his expression impassive. And why should I help you, Damian? You showed me no mercy. You left me to die. I made a mistake, Damian stammered, his eyes pleading. I was greedy, ambitious. I didn't realize. You didn't realize that your actions have consequences? Elias finished, his voice cold and sharp. You betrayed me, Damian. You stole my company, my life. And now? You expect my forgiveness? Damian fell to his knees, his body shaking. I'll do anything, Elias. I'll give it all back. I'll confess everything. Just help me. Elias looked down at him, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. You have nothing left to give, Damian. And your confession? It's worthless. The world already knows who you are. He turned and walked away, leaving Damian sobbing in the alley, a broken and defeated man. As he walked, he dialed a number. It's done, he said into the phone. Make the call. Within minutes, the police arrived to arrest Damien on charges stemming from the anonymous tips Elias had provided months earlier. Sienna Vance was confronted in a different setting, the empty, echoing shell of their former mansion, now owned by one of Elias's holding companies. She arrived expecting a reconciliation, a chance to reclaim her former life. Instead, she found Elias standing amidst the barren opulence, a cold, unyielding figure. "Elias," she said, her voice hesitant, her carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbling. I know I made mistakes, but can't we talk about this? Can't we start over?" Elias looked at her, his gaze piercing, stripping away her pretense. "Start over," he repeated, his voice laced with icy disdain. "After you betrayed me? After you plotted with Damien and Julian to steal everything I had?" "I was confused," she stammered, her eyes darting around the empty room. "I didn't know what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing, Sienna," Elias said, his voice hard and unforgiving. "You wanted money, power, excitement, and you were willing to destroy me to get it." He gestured around. "This is yours now." He then showed her a copy of every bank statement, of her expenses, of her lover, of the divorce papers. "But it's all gone," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes," Elias said, "and soon everyone will know that too." He turned and left her, all alone. She didn't even try to stop him. Lucas Gray's confrontation was the most disturbing. Elias found him in his squalid apartment, surrounded by computer screens displaying a chaotic jumble of news reports, conspiracy theories, and surveillance footage. Lucas was unshaven, his eyes wild, his clothes stained and rumpled. He was a raving lunatic, a prisoner of his own paranoia. "You!" Lucas screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Elias. "You did this! You're behind it all! You're controlling them! You're controlling everything!" Elias watched him, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're ill, Lucas," he said, his voice calm and even. "You need help." "Help?" Lucas shrieked. "You think I need help? You're the one who needs help. You're a monster, a devil." Elias sighed, a flicker of weariness crossing his face. He had orchestrated Lucas's descent into madness, feeding his paranoia, manipulating his thoughts, driving him to the brink. It was a cruel, calculated act, but it was necessary. Lucas had been a loose end, a potential threat. "I'm sorry, Lucas," Elias said, his voice devoid of any genuine emotion. "I truly am." He signaled to two men waiting discreetly in the hallway, orderlies from a private psychiatric hospital. They approached Lucas, their movements calm and professional. Lucas struggled, screamed, and fought, but they subdued him quickly, efficiently. As they led Lucas away, his screams echoing down the hallway, Elias felt a pang of something. Not guilt, not remorse, but perhaps a flicker of regret. But it was fleeting. He had done what was necessary. He had eliminated a threat. He had secured his victory. He looked at Lucas and said, "I really am sorry, my friend, but you did this to yourself." Lucas's scream faded. With his betrayers vanquished, Elias turned his attention to consolidating his power and solidifying his control. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a kingmaker, a puppet master, a force that could shape destinies and topple empires. He began by systematically placing his loyal followers in positions of power and influence. The former intelligence officer became his head of security, overseeing a vast network of surveillance and information gathering. The brilliant hacker was put in charge of his digital operations, ensuring the security of his communications and the vulnerability of his enemies. He cultivated relationships with key politicians, offering them financial support and strategic advice, gleaned, of course, from his mind-reading ability. He became a major donor to political campaigns, a sought-after advisor, a man whose influence extended into the highest echelons of power. He also used his wealth and influence to do good, to help those he deemed worthy. He established a charitable foundation, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, supporting medical research, and investing in sustainable energy projects. This wasn't entirely altruistic, of course. It was a calculated move, a way to build a positive public image, to deflect criticism, to create a facade of benevolence that masked his ruthless ambition. He knew that power required not just force, but also perception. He needed to be seen as a savior, a benefactor, a man of the people. The media, now partially under his control due to his strategic investments, portrayed him as a visionary leader, a brilliant entrepreneur, a philanthropist who had overcome adversity to achieve extraordinary success. He was hailed as a self-made man, a symbol of the American dream, a testament to the power of resilience and determination. He used his old company name, Vance Industries, and made sure the media knew that was an entirely different entity from Hayes Enterprises. But power, Elias was learning, was a double-edged sword. It attracted enemies, fueled envy, and bred suspicion. Even as he consolidated his control, he became aware of new threats, new challenges, new players in the game. Whispers of dissent began to circulate. Rumors of his ruthless tactics, his uncanny ability to predict market trends, his seemingly limitless influence. Some questioned his rapid rise, his sudden wealth, his uncanny knack for being in the right place at the right time. One voice in particular began to stand out. Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter for a small, independent news outlet. She was known for her tenacity, her integrity, and her unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. And she had set her sights on Elias Vance. "He's too good to be true," Elias heard her think during a press conference he held to announce a major philanthropic initiative. "There's something off about him, something he's hiding." Sarah Chen started digging, delving into Elias's past, investigating his business dealings and interviewing former associates of Damian Ross, Sienna Vance, and Lucas Gray. She was piecing together the puzzle, connecting the dots, slowly but surely uncovering the truth behind his carefully constructed facade. "There's a pattern here," she thought, as she reviewed the evidence she had gathered. A series of coincidences, bankruptcies, suicides, mental breakdowns, and Elias Vance always seems to benefit. She started publishing articles, initially cautious and circumspect, hinting at irregularities, raising questions, suggesting that there was more to Elias Vance's story than met the eye. The articles were largely ignored by the mainstream media, dismissed as conspiracy theories, the ravings of a disgruntled journalist. But they caught the attention of others. Politicians, rivals, people he had wronged. One of them, a senator named Arthur Reynolds. "This Vance, he's a threat," Reynolds thought during a meeting with his advisors. "He's too powerful, too influential. We need to find a way to control him, or eliminate him." Elias, of course, was aware of these threats. He could hear their thoughts, their plans, their fears. He knew who was plotting against him, who was investigating him, who was seeking to undermine his power. "Senator Reynolds seems quite interested in your past, Mr. Vance," said Miss Alvarez, looking at some legal documents. "He is just posturing, Miss Alvarez. He needs funding for his campaign," Elias answered calmly. "And the reporter, Ms. Chen, she is quite persistent." Elias smiled. "Let her dig. She won't like what she will find about herself." The whispers of dissent had grown louder, coalescing into a tangible threat. Senator Arthur Reynolds, a man with a reputation for integrity and a burning ambition for higher office, had taken a particular interest in Elias Vance. He saw Elias as a dangerous, unpredictable force, a man who wielded too much power without accountability, and he was determined to bring him down. This Vance, he's hiding something, Reynolds thought, during a late-night meeting with his chief of staff. His rise has been too rapid, too seamless. There's something unnatural about it. Reynolds had launched a discreet investigation, using his considerable influence and resources to probe into Elias's past, his business dealings, his connections. He was a skilled investigator, a seasoned politician, and he was starting to uncover pieces of the puzzle. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen, the investigative reporter, continued her relentless pursuit of the truth. She had connected Elias to the downfall of Damian Ross, Sienna Vance, and Lucas Gray, noticing the pattern of destruction that seemed to follow in his wake. He's like a spider, she thought, staring at a corkboard covered with photos, documents, and timelines. Sitting at the center of a web, pulling the strings, controlling everything. The pressure on Elias was mounting. He could hear the thoughts of his enemies, their suspicions, their plans, their determination to expose him. He was surrounded by a growing web of intrigue, a conspiracy that threatened to unravel everything he had built. He responded with his usual ruthlessness and precision. He used his mind-reading ability to anticipate their moves, to counter their strategies, to manipulate them into making mistakes. He planted false evidence, discrediting Sarah Chen's sources, painting her as a conspiracy theorist obsessed with taking down a successful businessman. He leaked damaging information about Senator Reynolds' past, exposing his own hypocrisy and corruption. He used his influence to block investigations, to silence critics, to maintain his control. This reporter, she's getting too close, Elias thought, watching a news report about Chen's latest article. I need to neutralize her. Permanently. He considered his options, weighing the risks and benefits. He could have her discredited, her career ruined, her life destroyed. He had the power to do it. He knew her secrets, her vulnerabilities, her fears. But something stopped him. A flicker of doubt, a whisper of conscience, a remnant of the man he once was. Is this who I've become? He thought, staring at his reflection in the darkened window of his office. A monster? A tyrant? Is this the price of power? The question hung in the air, unanswered. He had crossed so many lines, sacrificed so much, betrayed so many. He had achieved his revenge. He had secured his position, but at what cost? He dismissed the doubts, pushing them down, burying them beneath layers of cold, hard determination. He had no choice. He had to protect himself, his empire, his power. He had come too far to turn back now. The final confrontation came, as these things often do, unexpectedly. Senator Reynolds, armed with a dossier of evidence he had painstakingly compiled, requested a private meeting with Elias. He believed he had enough to expose Elias, to bring him down, to end his reign of power. I know who you are, Vance, Reynolds thought, as he sat across from Elias in his opulent office. I know what you've done, and I'm going to stop you. Elias smiled, a cold, knowing smile. He had anticipated this, of course. He had been monitoring Reynolds' thoughts, tracking his investigation, preparing for this very moment. Senator Reynolds, Elias said, his voice calm and measured. I admire your persistence, your dedication to justice, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. Reynolds scoffed. Misinformation? I have proof, Vance. Proof of your manipulations, your crimes, your abilities. Elias raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Abilities? Reynolds leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Don't play coy with me, Vance. I know about the mind reading. I know how you've been controlling people, manipulating events, destroying lives. Elias was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected this. He had underestimated Reynolds, underestimated his resources, his intelligence. How How did he find out? He thought, a flicker of panic rising within him, but he quickly regained his composure. He couldn't afford to show weakness. To reveal his fear, he had to maintain control. "You're delusional, Senator," Elias said, his voice smooth and dismissive. "You've been listening to too many conspiracy theories." Reynolds smiled, a grim, humorless smile. "I have proof, Vance. Witnesses, recordings, documents. I have everything I need to expose you, to bring you down." He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "I'm giving you a chance, Vance," he said. "Resign, disappear before I release this to the public." Elias looked at the folder, his mind racing. He could hear Reynolds' thoughts, his confidence, his certainty that he had won. But he also heard something else. A flicker of doubt, a hint of fear. Reynolds wasn't as sure of himself as he appeared. Elias leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're a smart man, Senator," he said slowly, "but you're making a mistake. You're playing a game you can't win." He then proceeded to reveal his own hand, the cards he had been holding in reserve. He revealed his knowledge of Reynolds' own secrets, his own corrupt dealings, his own hidden sins. He had used his mind-reading ability to gather information, to uncover the skeletons in Reynolds' closet. "I know about the offshore accounts, Senator," Elias said, his voice low and menacing. "I know about the bribes, the kickbacks, the affairs. I know everything." Reynolds paled, his confidence crumbling. He had underestimated Elias, underestimated his power, his reach, his ruthlessness. Elias then delivered the final blow. He activated a hidden recording device, playing back a conversation between Reynolds and his chief of staff. A conversation in which they discussed their plans to frame Elias, to fabricate evidence, to destroy his reputation. This is illegal," Reynolds stammered, his voice shaking. "You can't do this." "I can, and I have," Elias replied coldly. "You came here to destroy me, Senator, but you walked into a trap, my trap." He then offered Reynolds a choice: resign, disappear, and keep his secrets safe, or face public exposure, disgrace, and ruin. Reynolds, defeated and humiliated, chose the former. He left Elias's office a broken man, his career in tatters, his ambition crushed. Elias stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the city he now controlled. He had achieved ultimate success. He had vanquished his enemies, amassed unimaginable wealth, and secured a position of absolute power. He was a king, in all but name. But the victory was bittersweet. He had paid a heavy price for his triumph. He had sacrificed his innocence, his morality, his humanity. He had become a master manipulator, a ruthless strategist, a man who trusted no one and was feared by all. He could hear the thoughts of everyone around him, a constant cacophony of desires, fears, and secrets. He knew their lies, their betrayals, their hidden agendas. He was surrounded by enemies, by potential threats, by people who envied his power and sought to take it from him. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. The price of his power. "Are you happy, Elias?" The voice startled him. It was his own voice, his inner voice, a whisper of doubt that he had tried so hard to suppress. He looked at his reflection in the darkened glass of the balcony door. He saw a man who had everything and nothing. A man who had conquered the world, but lost his soul. "Was it worth it?" the voice asked again, more insistent this time. He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He didn't know. He turned away from the reflection, from the city, from the empire he had built. He walked back inside, into the opulent, empty silence of his penthouse. He was a king, yes, but his kingdom was a prison, and his crown a heavy burden. He was surrounded by courtiers, by servants, by sycophants, but he had no friends, no love, No trust. As he sits and pours a drink, he hears, faint at first, some voices. Thoughts. They are coming closer. Someone is investigating him. Again. He closed his eyes. A weary sigh escaping his lips. "It never ends," he whispered to the empty room. "The game never ends." He took a long sip. He smiled. "But I do enjoy playing. Don't I?" He was the king. And the game continued. He was ready. He would always be ready. He had to be.